Back in 2021, Deshaun Watson, coming off of one of his best seasons, if not his best season, requested a trade, partially and mostly due to the Texans really struggling to build a competitive team around him, as they had a very bad year as a team, even though he was very good. Shortly after that, a scandal broke out, which I'm sure you've all heard of, involving Deshaun Watson. He sat out for a whole year until 2022. He was going to be traded, and there were several teams in on the Deshaun Watson trade. The Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints both made deals, but ultimately Deshaun Watson had a no-trade clause, and he chose to go to Cleveland because Cleveland was willing to give him a fully guaranteed deal. This was the ultimate trade where you would see there would be a 2022 first and fourth, a 2023 first and third, and then a 2024 first and fourth round pick. Keep in mind, this was the draft capital that the Cleveland Browns gave up when Deshaun Watson said, I'm requesting a trade and I want to go here. So there was no leverage that Houston had, but with no leverage, this was still the value that Watson was able to be sold for. And while in hindsight that looks absolutely insane, it's worth mentioning other teams were willing to do this. The Saints and the Falcons knew this is how much it would cost and were also willing to do this. So this is just what he was going for at the time. Again, you're getting a guy in his mid-20s who's a potential elite level quarterback. That's going to go for a lot, even with, we'll just say, off the field issues, which is obviously way too light of a term, but that's what we're going to use here. But now that we've finished the 2024 season, every pick from this trade has at least played 1 year in the NFL. So let's look at where all these players are at now and how did the Texans really improve from this trade? Because, of course, for the Browns, we all know the answer. It went horribly. They missed all these draft picks, and they have a player who really hurts their cap. Okay, yeah, that was an issue. But for the Texans, what did they do with all of this draft capital? Well, we'll start with 2022. First, the easy one, the 2022 fourth they got with this pick. They just selected Dameon Pierce, who had a really good rookie year. Hasn't done a ton since then, though. He's a running back for the Texans. The first round pick is a little bit more complicated because with a lot of these picks, they traded. So we have to kind of go do a deep dive to figure out what they ultimately got. So they actually traded back a couple of spots. It was the 13th overall pick that they had. They traded back to the 15th pick to select Kenyon Green, a guard who, quite frankly, just hasn't been very good for them. Jordan Davis was who the Eagles drafted. So, again, Eagles tend to make some pretty smart decisions, right? But the Houston Texans also had 3 other draft picks, which they would trade all away in 3 different trades. First, this trade where they would give up pick 68, 108, and 124 to the Cleveland Browns, actually. The Browns would select Martin Emerson, Perrion Winfrey, and Cade York. The Texans would get John Mechie back, a player who, ultimately had some just issues staying on the field, which were really unfortunate. But he, still has shown some flashes. Is still a player on the roster, but maybe hasn't lived up to pick 44 hype just due to that. The other trade, they ended up getting Christian Harris, a linebacker, with pick 75. So they traded pick 80 and pick 162 to do that. Christian Harris has been an effective linebacker for them. He, first year definitely looked like a rookie, but still showed flashes. Year 2, he played pretty well, but then last year he was hurt for most of the season, came back late in the year, but ultimately, unfortunately, missed most of last year, but is a quality player. And then finally, not the most notable trade, but they had another one where they got Thomas Booker with pick 150. So those were that's the Jordan Davis trade and what they did with the first round pick in 2022. In 2023, this was the more interesting, I think, year for the Texans. This trade was the huge one. There was all the question of, do you draft CJ Stroud or do you draft Will Anderson Jr.? They decided to draft CJ Stroud with pick 2, but then they traded for pick 3. They gave up a 2022 first round pick. So this was the Browns pick 13. They also traded their own 2024 first round pick. And then they traded pick 33 of this draft. And quite frankly, this kind of worked out great for Houston. This is what the trade ended up being. It was Will Anderson Jr. for the picks that they ended up, the Texans gave up, were used on Lucas Van Ness, Darius Robinson, and Will Levis. I would say that was a pretty big slam dunk here. I don't think any team would rather have Lucas Van Ness, Darius Robinson, and Will Levis over Will Anderson Jr. So slam dunk, well done here for the Houston Texans. But that wasn't the only thing they did well in this draft. They also traded for pick 69, which they used on Tank Dell, who's been a very good player for them. Now, they did give up the 2023 third round pick. This is from the Watson trade. They gave that up. It ended up being Cooper Beebe, who's been an effective center for Dallas. So they did give up a player here along with a couple other depth guys. But yeah, I would still say this is a win for Houston, even if I do like Beebe a decent amount for Dallas. And then finally, this past draft. So the pick they gave up, they once again traded away the Browns pick. And to be honest, one they might regret a little bit. So they traded it to the Minnesota Vikings, who then traded it to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who selected Brian Thomas Jr. with pick 23. Anytime you're giving up that pick, you don't feel great about it. Although they did get good value back from this trade. Kamari Laster, who they selected at pick 42, was a really good corner for them for Houston. Jamel Hill did not take a snap for them last year, but they also got a 2025 second round pick. So really good corner and a second round pick. Okay, maybe you'd still rather have Brian Thomas Jr., but it's fair value, right? They then traded that second round pick to get Stephon Diggs, pick 189, which they ultimately traded as well, and a 2025 fifth round pick. So that 2025 fifth round pick is the one pick involved here that for Houston that we don't know how that's gonna end. They also did give up a 2025 second round pick that they got. So that's another pick that we don't know how those are going to work out, right? But they just put a bow on everything for pick 189. They made a trade with the Lions for some depth pieces. So that is the overall trade. That is what the Texans got and what they lost. This is the chart of what they could have had but lost, and it's going to be small on the screen because there's a lot of players, but I tried to put the most notable names towards the top of the list. Obviously, Deshaun Watson is a good thing that you did not keep him because he has not played well and is getting paid a lot of money. Brian Thomas Jr., definitely a guy you would like to have. There's some pieces here, right? They definitely lost. I think the bigger ones you look at are the future trades they made, not the Deshaun Watson trade, losing him, obviously. And then who the Texans got, again, worth mentioning, the Texans, these are just the players. They also got a fifth round pick and they lost a second round pick, so that should be factored in. But, Will Anderson Jr., Tank Dell, Kamari Laster, some really good players. Even Stephon Diggs, who is now a free agent, you did get some play out of him, right? Even if it didn't go quite as you were hoping for. But still, you have that, Christian Harris still is effective. So as a whole, obviously, the Texans won the trade. I'll put kind of the most notable names, in my opinion, on the screen. So the top is what the Texans got. The bottom is what the Texans could have had they kept their original picks. So you have Will Anderson Jr., who is, again, fantastic. Tank Dell, who I think is really effective. Kamari Laster, who's really good. Got some value from Stephon Diggs, Christian Harris, and Dameon Pierce. You did lose Brian Thomas Jr., Jordan Davis, and Cooper Beebe, but definitely the Texans have moved in the right direction because of this trade. I do think it is fair to say, you look at that haul that they got from Deshaun Watson, it's maybe a bit underwhelming, right? You view something like that as a potential Herschel Walker trade that could allow you to have, several great players. And while they did get several great players, they also lost a couple to make that happen. So I think that's the question. And I would say, again, if we're strictly just talking from a football perspective, you can kind of see why a team like the Cleveland Browns, for football reasons, wanted to trade for someone like Deshaun Watson. Again, there's the whole ethical component, which we don't have to get into, but if Deshaun Watson was an elite level quarterback, and you threw an elite level quarterback, if you threw Joe Burrow on the bottom section there, it'd be no question you'd rather have the side with Joe Burrow, right? Because an elite level quarterback is so valuable. So again, the Texans, I think, did a solid job with their draft capital, but just you're going to miss some picks, right? That's kind of how it works. As a whole, though, the Texans certainly, I think, have moved significantly in the right direction. Will Anderson Jr. is a part of that core. Kamari Laster is a really good player, and I think that they're still looking at that trade as a way that has been able to propel them to being a team that has won multiple playoff games. But I also would say, looking through this, if you're a team considering trading for a quarterback you think is elite, don't be afraid to do it. I don't think this should make you, make sure that you're trading for a quarterback who's actually good, right? That's the thing you have to make sure you're doing. But if you can get a great quarterback, it's still worth it. However, a lot of times, if there's a quarterback on the market there might be a reason for it. This was a unique scenario, so not quite the best example, but you get what I'm saying. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the interesting Deshaun Watson trade. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And, of course, as always, thanks for watching.